Sometimes, and this is one of them, when reading Scripture demands quite a bit of subtlety and sympathy. Not the middle-class luxury of simplicity, nor either the idolatry of totalitarian consistency, but embracing that richness which allows that the positions we hold may be adjacent colours on the rainbow, rather than mutually negating black and white, and that sometimes even those boundaries will blur, and that's all right. After all, how can anyone read the Gospels without reconciled inconsistency? Which is a vital skill for life today. The spirit, rather than the letter, gives life. So when a tale is told, let's first savour it as a tale, because poetry can be the most comprehensively accurate way of conveying truth. In both readings, we're immersed in a human environment which is more than a bit mad, but oblivious to its own unjust madness. There's also those on the edge who trust God, but lack the power definitively to sort things out. And they turn to the familiar, reliable solidarity of the court of nature for comfort and sanity. They speak or turn to the earth or to the sea. Right now, though, that very reliability which has cradled our civilization for millennia, though been downgraded for last century, that is being burned away. Nature has more on its plate, and most of it we have put there. Job appeals to the honesty of other creatures, though at the cost of the realization that both God and the earth have other agenda than our own. Other agendas than endless economic growth or single-use anything at all. In our day, the resort to nature is complicated and enriched by the inseparable solidarity of suffering and abused humanity with the fast eroding resilience of the current systems of the planet. But then, in the Bible, 'twas ever so. As the guest scientists in the climate debate before the general election said, nature is your friend. Though to that we can add that nature is a wounded friend whose wounds are crying out in person, as the poor and abused have always cried out in person to God for justice. If your friends despise, forsake you, take it to the Lord in prayer. Well, if you do, you might find fellow creatures already in the waiting room. Now, of course, speaking to fellow creatures or to nature is both something people have always done, and plenty of Zoom meetings right now include cats in particular. But it's also something in which poetry and scripture reconcile modes of speech. We find that mountains do dance, trees do clap their hands, while Jesus scolds unruly waves and unfruitful trees. To say that the earth speaks, or that, as it's now well established, not just birds, beasts and dolphins communicate, but even trees, that cannot anymore be held in contempt. Recognising personhood needs not to be inhibited by embarrassment about anthropomorphization. But that sort of dismissal relates to the demonic othering, which we have this year become just a wee bit more aware of with regard to the varieties of our own species. Frighteningly soon, after you find a pretext to ignore personhood, you also find you're ready to obliterate the life before you. Black lives, refugee lives matter, and they matter first to God. Does God matter to us? I sometimes wonder if most of the Christians I know for most of my lifetime have been playing the game of grown-up church. I'll include there the ludicrous haughtiness of the respected Bible commentary that was commended to me while I was at Oxford. This is not a miracle story because the miracle is not described. And yet a miracle, a sign, is not characterized by the impossible or by details of description, but rather by its capability to point to Christ. Matthew 17 is rather like plenty of despised and excluded resources of Scripture, which are shut out of the lectionary as either too silly or too scary for sensible grown-up people. This is not a particularly scary story, though no doubt for those who think folk tales are only for children, they might find it silly and an embarrassment to their woeful picture of a prudent and level-headed Jesus. Yet here, in Jesus' exceptional care for his friend Peter, in this story, we uncover encouragement for when we are out of our depth, when we are hemmed in on one side by the conflict of circumstance and principles we've only just begun to adopt, and we're hemmed in on the other side by business as usual. The offence that the taxmen might have taken would have been a cause of stumbling for them. And that, for Jesus, is something to avoid. Am I reading too much into the Jesus I hope I know to suggest that if he's going to challenge us to change us, he prefers to stack up the odds that we do grasp why? To clear out the stumbling blocks so that denial, as well as acceptance, can happen freely and responsibly. In days of environmental emergency, we could pave a cobbled street with the stumbling blocks we ourselves daily encounter. Yet in good faith, we are here to convince, not defeat, those who for now evade what we might be struggling to grasp. My job title might be environmental chaplain, but I consistently struggle to digest the very bad news about the environment which drops like Chinese water torture into my inbox every day. The thing is neither to be overwhelmed by alarmism nor get hemmed in by those incremental steps which reassure me I've done my bit and can get on with business as usual. If you're going to the trouble of change, why not a leap rather than just a step? And today, what would Peter say to various things, knowing that unlike electricity generation, the sector of transport is intransigent in its progress to decarbonisation? I don't seem to be able to afford an electric car, but if I don't travel for work, I'll probably lose my job. Knowing that meat and dairy globally have a huge carbon footprint, I gave up meat for Lent, but I'm trying to feed my family as best I know how. And I know that farmers are already under huge pressure, and I love cheese. Notwithstanding our COVID spring of clean air and water, audible birdsong and quiet roads, climate matters remain increasingly urgent. And a response is called for every today. So though solutions may be further down the line, or transformation rather than solution may be our only option, what we have to avoid is getting locked in. As my diesel car falls apart, do I lock myself into another fossil fuel vehicle for years, or hold on for a month or two, hoping options open up for electric, or consider in the meantime whether I'd be better off without the thing at all? Likewise, the ill-conceived government scheme to replace old domestic boilers with gas rather than promote the leap into heat pumps. What do I do about that? In considering all of these, I feel close to Peter, who was cared for by Jesus. Peter's first response about the tax question was actually a defense of the basic respectability of Jesus, not to be passed off as some shady tax evader, but then he wonders if what he's heard from Jesus about how the temple is run means it's consistent to take some sort of a stand. Jesus' response, and let's take it at face value in the story and not get bogged down with juvenile grown-upism about whether the fish could really have happened. Jesus' response, which notably enlists the help of nature, is a fudge with integrity. From the historic creeds onwards, fudges with integrity, far more than rigid and narrow precision, are what help us move on, what draws us together, rather than getting strangled by still evolving principles. Of that, I'll note in passing the tendency in churches still to waffle on about stewardship of creation, which grew in popularity out of the liberal horror at the scandalous reading of human dominion as domination, unchallenged even by some of the most unassailable Christian spiritual thinkers. Stewardship tends to be of inert property rather than sentient persons. Stewardship doesn't give us the shove we need, looking fellow creatures in the face, bringing the possibility not only of intimate conversation, what we used to call intercourse with creation, but also the more threatening truth that we are at the mercy of the same earth that we abuse. Care for creation at the end of the day is our family business. It's our calling, not as hired hands who run away in danger, but like that good shepherd who lays their life on the line. So the outcome of Matthew 17, Peter and Jesus aren't compromised by paying the tax, but the belligerent authorities who wouldn't have grasped what they're on about, they are satisfied and pacified. And what is more, the valuable common ground between the tax officers and Jesus, namely the praise of the same God, is also safeguarded. There's a chance for a further hearing. Between climate activists and climate deniers, the ground we stand on is our common home. if we're encouraging and modelling in all things exemplary love for the earth, that will move things on at least as much as quoting lots of facts and figures. But that too might require the courage to be laughed at, looked down on, called those names like tree hugger, Baptist, Methodist, Christian, which began as insults but became badges of honour. Then Peter, who if he knows nothing else, knows how to fish, is affirmed as he repurposes his existing skills and resources to respond to a changed situation. Peter knew that to catch fish, you have to go out on the water and look for them, reminding us that our existing gifts and faith are never single use, but given to be used, reused, recycled, repurposed, and re-blessed.